We're gathered here today to discuss why Smiling Friends, a viral, meme-worthy, and also seemingly beloved show, is ending after just a few seasons. And it begs the question, is popularity not the same as longevity anymore? And this is what I wanted to delve into. So, unfortunately, I ran across a post yesterday on Instagram that was announcing that Smiling Friends is coming to an end, which I was not expecting whatsoever. Today is February 27th, so I don't know when this video is going to come out, hopefully soon. But, despite that, I wanted to kind of give a little bit of backstory as to why this might be happening. So, big news in the animation world today, Smiling Friends, the surreal, absurd Adult Swim hit, is officially coming to an end. RIP to a very short, I guess, run for a very significant series. And so it's clear that this show has had an impact on so many people. I think a lot of people love the show. There are a lot of funny takeaways when it came to the show as well. Sad for a lot of people because people like us, people like me who love to watch some of those brain rot type of shows, I think Smiling Friends was something that kind of filled in the gap for a lot of people, something fun to watch, easy to watch, just really off-putting and a lot of times very weird and uncomfortable.
Hey, no biting, okay? You want me to bite you? Yeah. You know that hurts, Daddy. I told you, silly. No biting, okay? You're my good little baby, huh?
But if you don't know what Smiling Friends was, like, first question, what made you click on the video? And then second, what are you doing? Like, your For You page and Explore page must be so dry. Like, it must be the saddest For You or Explore page to exist because Smiling Friends has been everywhere on social media. The memes are everywhere. The reels are everywhere. Like, people have loved, people are loving and have been loving this show. Not to brag, but my For You page, my Explore page, I must say, I built it brick by brick.
Suck brick, kid!
And man, you know it's good when you have Smiling Friends on your Explore page. Anyways, to get back on topic, the show's co-creators Zach Hadel and Michael Cusack shared an emotional announcement on Adult Swim official social media channels, confirming that season 3 will be the last for this series.
Gonna cut right to the chase. This is not a bit. This is not a joke. Michael and I are here to announce that Smiling Friends will be ending after season 3 is done.
We should explain why. And to be perfectly honest, after we finished season 3, Zach and I just both had the same feeling where we feel pretty burnt out after putting years and years into this, but also pretty accomplished. Like, we just came to this feeling where we're like, I think that could just be it.
They also made it clear that the decision wasn't a joke or a bit. It was intentional and heartfelt. So even though the series was previously reported to have been renewed through season 4 and 5, Hadel and Cusack explained that after finishing season 3, they both felt burnt out but also accomplished and decided that it was the right time to wrap things up. But they did confirm that there will be 2 additional episodes that are described as stories that didn't quite fit into the season 3 schedule, and that those episodes will air before the show officially concludes. I will be linking the official news sources, including LA Times, People, and also Vulture in the description, so that way you guys can check out the links yourself and actually see the actual statements from these creators, just so that you can get the full context if that's what you want to do. In this 3 series long show, I mean, it's pretty clear that, like, the cancellation and what we've seen on it, it's definitely a choice. The creators made it very clear that through the announcement through Adult Swim that they've been grinding non-stop for years and felt like the show had run its natural course. That phrase natural course is a very important point here, and it doesn't give me the vibe that it has anything to do with them running out of ideas, or that the ratings have dropped, or that the network is pulling the plug, or that there's anything going wrong in the background. To me, it sounds more like they've said everything they've wanted to say, at least for now. And I think that mindset reflects something bigger that's happening in television right now. Animation especially is brutal. People sometimes assume that it's like easier because it's drawn, but it's often more exhausting. For these animators or for these creators, like, they're literally rewriting, re-recording, reanimating, fine-tuning every single frame. And a single episode can take couple months, honestly. Like, it's a very, very, very tedious line of work. So when you're the creator behind it, like the brains behind the whole thing, you're writing, you're performing, you're overseeing tone, your mind pretty much never turns off. So I can imagine it could be very overwhelming for them, especially with how popular the show has become. And this brings me to the social media pressure that I feel like they're probably under as well. So when shows like The Smiling Friends become more mainstream and becomes meme dominant, the feedback loop becomes more constant. So you'll have more clips everywhere, expectations higher every season, fans dissecting every line, and then comparison to earlier episodes. And I feel like the internet doesn't quite let shows like just quietly exist anymore, and I think that's just a part of what social media is. Creators aren't just making the show, they're living within the reaction circle. And I think that this points to a noticeable shift happening where creators treat shows more like novels than like sitcom machines. So instead of the mindset of like, let's run this until the ratings drop, I think a lot of the creators these days are more so like, let's just complete the arc. Like there's intention behind it. We've seen this with shows like Fleabag, where Phoebe Waller-Bridge chose to end it intentionally after 2 seasons, and you also see it within Atlanta, where Donald Glover treats the series like a contained artistic project rather than a 10-episode franchise. These shows ended strong, and because they ended intentionally, they avoided decline. The creators of Smiling Friends may not want the humor to feel repetitive, the absurdism to become predictable, the show to morph into something diluted just because it can continue. Ending early can actually preserve the legacy. To me, that is a more creative decision and not a commercial decision, and I can respect that. I feel like when a creator can actually be able to admit, look, we don't really have anything else to talk about, and by trying to force it, we'll probably just ruin the reputation that the show already has and ruin the fan base's like view of the series and love for it, because I think, you know, as fans, like we can always feel that like whenever something's being forced rather than made intentional and actually having something to say. So although Smiling Friends is probably a show that you can see going on for so many seasons and probably just coming out with more absurdity and just weird stuff like constantly, I think that like the decision to say like, you know, we don't really have anything to contribute right now, and being able to admit that, to say, look, we're burned out, and understanding that, look, you could put out more and get the money, but not actually like be able to put, like, you know, that there's no intention behind it. So when I feel like things are not as intentional, that's when things tend to crumble. And I think that when a creator is able to be humble and be honest, to be like, look, I don't think that we can continue to do that, I honestly respect it, and I think this is probably the best decision that they could have made for this show. There's also the structural reality of this whole thing, and that's just the fact that high concept absurdist comedy has a creative ceiling. Smiling Friends thrives on unpredictability, its bizarre tonal shifts and chaotic humor, and chaos is hard to escalate forever. Eventually, either the shows get bigger, the risk loses subtlety, or they get safer and less edgy, or they repeat patterns and lose freshness. And I think that creators often are aware when they're approaching that ceiling before the audience does, and so artists are usually harsher critics on their own work than fans. So when the creators say that the show has run its course, it might mean that if we keep going, this won't be the same as what you guys have seen and loved before. And I think that's a scary place to be at creatively, because once the quality dips, the audience isn't going to say, oh, it had a good run. They're going to say that it fell off, or they're going to have a lot of other complaints. But this is where I think the bigger issue lies. I think that from the outside, the show feels huge, but you see the clips everywhere, the memes everywhere, the cultural presence everywhere, but virality is intensity, not necessarily longevity. So the show can pretty much be extremely visible, extremely online, and extremely beloved, but it can still feel complete creatively. So being on the internet, or just being a fan in general, I think that a lot of times we have this idea that just because something is popular, that it should last forever. But in contrast, I think that a lot of artists equate complete with it's time to move on. So I think that where the internet, as far as like the fans and the audience, and then also the creators kind of clash, is that a lot of times as, audience members or like fans, like we tend to see something that is popular as something that could last forever, whereas artists might see something like, seeing it as more complete, or seeing something as complete as, the time is time to move on to something else. And I think that's where things clash, because obviously as fans, when we like something, we want to keep seeing it, but then on the creative end, you get that quality because there's intentionality behind it, because there was something to say. But once there's nothing more to say, at least at that time, like, it's obviously the best move to kind of end things and move on, especially because there's so much that goes into making animations and making those type of shows. Like, you want the quality, And, you know, especially when it gets to the point where the creators themselves are telling you, like, I'm burnt out, and are saying that, like, on them, like, for them, you know, as the creators, like, they know that they won't be able to provide, you know, I would prefer them not to touch it if that's, like, what they feel. Like, just let it end. And then hopefully maybe later down the line when they're feeling inspired again, they could revisit it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure the memes and the reels and those type of things are going to be circulating for a very long time. I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. And so as long as that love is there through the fans, and there's, like, you know, if you were to put content out that wasn't good, right, it would create like negativity for the fans, right? People would stop caring about the show. They won't really talk about it as much. Sure, the memes and stuff might still circulate, but the love wouldn't be there like that. Just imagine if them ending it now would result in a situation where later down the line they can revisit it, and then like the audience actually be excited because they remember it from a positive perspective. You know what I'm saying? So I think sometimes it's best to kind of end things off on a good note, and then maybe down the line we have something more to say and you're ready, they're inspired again, like they can actually go back and create some good stuff for the fans if they choose to do that. But I also think there's another part of it that I feel like doesn't get discussed enough, and I think that that's just the fact that not every idea is meant to be infinite. The golden era of running like TV shows, they can go on for years, up to like, you know, 10 plus seasons, or even like sometimes even just something like 5 or 8 or something like that, with like 22 episodes per year or whatnot. So at that time, I think back in the day, obviously it was just built under a different industrial model than we have today. I think at that time writers were designed for procedural repetition, and shows like Smiling Friends aren't really procedural. They're personal, they're voice driven, they're specific, and I think that specificity burns brighter but shorter, if that makes sense. Like, you know, it's just like a moment in time. It's like lightning versus a street light, but it doesn't stay forever, and I think that's the point. That's the magic of it. So I guess the real question would be, like, would you rather the show burn out creatively or end while it's still brilliant? I think that question kind of reframes the sadness. So if you think about it from a different perspective, it's like, oh yeah, it's probably for the best. So maybe the reason why shows don't last as long these days isn't necessarily because of corporate or just because of corporate economics, but also maybe because like the creators, they now have more leverage, more ownership, more desire to protect their art. And maybe that's not decline, maybe that's maturity. That's a valid thing to do. I always support the artists, you know, especially artists that are mindful like this, are pretty self-aware, to be like, look, we're not in it right now, time to just cut it. I think I can respect that, rather than these other money hungry people who only just make it because it's profitable, but not really having any type of love or intention after a certain point. You can usually tell or feel it when it starts to get that way. But if you zoom in specific animations, on certain animations, popular animations at that, and the pattern I've been talking about becomes more clear, because animations have always had two very specific and different life cycles. The first one being the infinite machine model, and the second one being the creator driven finite model. We're going to start with the infinite model first, and for that I have the examples of The Simpsons, a classic. This series has over 30 seasons. And now, you know, culturally, most fans will tell you that the golden era were the earlier seasons. The show became an institution, but many argue the creative sharpness changed over time. That's not necessarily an insult, but just the reality of longevity. So when something like that, when a show like that runs for so long, the tonal evolution is inevitable. Like, it's gonna change, it's gonna be different. From here, we're gonna go into Family Guy. We all know what Family Guy is. It's all over social media. It's been out for so many years. It's a classic. This is another long-running series that has had immense and huge cultural impact, but it operates on a formula. It has more like an episodic structure. It's more of like what I would call like reset button storytelling. The model is designed to last. You can pretty much, you know, make differences. You can just do whatever. Like, it's not necessarily like set. You know, notice how none of the characters age or anything like that. You pretty much just do whatever you want with the show and pretty much just go to the next episode like nothing ever happened. Like, it's just it's just is wild like that. That's the point. And then we have the show Over the Garden Wall. This one may not be as like well known, maybe like for more adults maybe, but this one was like a more of like a short running show. It only had 10 episodes in one season, and then it finished. And because this particular show is contained, it felt timeless. And it's also a show that like people who do know the show love the show. And then you have a show like Gravity Falls. Like I said, if you're an adult, you probably won't really know the show. For me, I'm aware of the show. I think I've kind of aged out of Disney a little bit by the time the show came out. Maybe, yeah. I think I was pretty much aging out when the show came out, kind of. Yeah, this one was definitely a big show, a very popular show. It's giving Cartoon Network, but on Disney Channel. But anyways, this show ran for 2 seasons, and the creator Alex Hirsch ended it intentionally. The ratings were very strong, the fandom was massive, and the merchandising potential was huge. But Hirsch had said that he had always designed it as a finite story. And because of that, Gravity Falls is remembered as complete, not diluted. So with all that being said, where the Smiling Friends actually fall within these 2 categories? It's not necessarily structured like The Simpsons, and it's not designed like Family Guy. So in my opinion, it's much closer to the creator-driven model, like Gravity Falls or the Over the Garden series, where the tone and the voice are tightly controlled by specific artists. Because voice-driven absurdist comedy is harder to industrialize than any other like animated series or whatever that could be out there. So when the humor comes from a specific rhythm, a specific weirdness, and a specific creative brain, it's not infinitely renewable. It's going to become old at some point, you know what I'm saying? You can't just plug in a new writing room and expect the same energy. So I think the question is less of why didn't the show go on longer, and more so of was it even meant to be, or is it even meant to be? Infinite cartoons are built on formula. Finite cartoons are built on... These people, I swear guys, anybody else living in an apartment with loud people up above you, I swear to God. Anyways, like I was saying, finite cartoons are built on voice. It's like a lightning in a bottle. You can't always like encapsulate that same type of vibe and energy that you got initially, which is why those type of series, you really have to be intentional and mindful. And sometimes it's best to just end things where they are than trying to chase a bag and get more money and just kind of ruin the intentionality and the magic from earlier seasons. Why does it matter that a show like Smiling Friends is ending intentionally rather than going on for like 8 or 10 seasons? And I think that it's because it touches on something bigger than just one show. It touches on ownership, it touches on quality control, and I think it also touches on the tension between creators and also the audience and the fans. I think that a lot of times when it comes to television, we've been kind of told that longevity equals success, or more seasons equal a better show, and also that something that's still on air means it's still winning, means it's still good, right? Which also isn't always the case with a lot of different things. Like we've seen a lot of shows that are still going that we don't understand why it's still like going, when it's clearly not as good as it was before, right? It's kind of dragging it out. But I think that was because in that era, a lot of the shows and a lot of the networks controlled everything, and shows are basically made as machines, especially of course the more popular shows. But now we're in a different era. We have streaming, there's so much competition, and I feel like a lot of creative driven animation, especially something like Smiling Friends, isn't a factory product. Like I said before, it's voice based, it's personality based, it's very specific. And when a show is that specific, the creators are the show. And if the creators feel like it's done, then the fans should also probably understand that and respect that, because obviously nobody's going to be able to do it better than these creators, and if the creators kept going, you're not going to get the same quality that you would have experienced before, which would ruin your feelings towards the show and your frustrations towards those creators and any other future projects that they might come out with in the future. And I feel like, you know, when it comes to being a fan and how fans feel, it's definitely understandable. I feel like there's a lot of, you know, real emotional tension. You know what I mean? Like fans fall in love with the show, and then people, the community around it, they meme it, they quote it, they attach pieces of their actual identity to it. And when it ends, it feels like something is being taken away. But from a creator's perspective, continuing the past creative exhaustion can dilute something that made it special. We've all seen this happen before. You know, a show stays on a little bit too long, the jokes feel recycled, the characters feel flat, and the edge that it had before has softened completely. And suddenly the legacy goes from the show was amazing to it used to be amazing. And that's like the worst thing ever when it comes to something that you genuinely loved and you see it like slowly just decline over time. It sucks. And also keep it in mind that ending something early can actually protect the rewatch value. It freezes a show in its strongest form. You know what I'm saying? So imagine like, you know, 10 years from now, somebody discovers Smiling Friends and, you know, they don't have to say, oh, just watch up to this season or any of that kind of stuff. Like they can just watch the whole show and it's still good. It's good all the way through. You know what I'm saying? Like there's no season to avoid. I think it's a very powerful thing. Also, just even financially or like even for the statistics or the ratings, I feel like it's good for that as well. I feel like when you end a show off like on a bad note, I'm not saying it's hard to go back and rewatch it, but I feel like when it's on a good note, it's easy to go back to that show and just rewatch it, because then you can just rewatch it all the way through and you'll enjoy it. And of course, like the hard pill to swallow as a fan when it comes to anything that we love is that we do not own these properties. We do not own these things. And I think that even though we love it, we support it, we fund it, we celebrate it, the thing is that the emotional creative burden lives with, the creators. And honestly, historically, from what we've seen, a lot of these creators sometimes do not have the power to stop when they need to stop. And a lot of shows were stretched because they were profitable, characters were revived because they sold, and spin-offs were greenlit because they were safe. And we're seeing that a lot lately. It's just a terrible, sick thing. By the way, check out my last video. I talk about that in that video. I'm gonna make a more in-depth video with that, but anyways, yeah, it just creates a toxic cycle that nobody wants. So when a creator honestly says that they're done with something, I think that that's an amazing sign of autonomy. I think that autonomy in art, like, it just leads to legacies, in my opinion. It's something with being able to say no and know when to stop or end something that I feel like is very powerful. And I feel like that's the case with Smiling Friends. And it's simple. Shows that end well, age well. Simple as that. They're easy to revisit, they're easy to recommend, they're easier to preserve as cultural artifacts as well. A tight 3-season series can sometimes outweigh a show that's been out for far more seasons. It's just the truth. A lot of times, sometimes these shorter, series do a way better job and have way more weight than some of these other shows that are out here that go on for seasons and seasons and seasons and just kind of milk the crap out of the whole thing. Not always a bad thing, but a lot of times it doesn't really have the best impact for the fans over time. And I think that that's because sometimes a lot of the shorter shows that are ended well, I think it's because obviously it was intentional and it feels whole. It doesn't feel like anything's missing from it. And I think that in an age of endless content where everything is rebooted, renewed, revisited, franchised, something ending on purpose feels, honestly for me, rare and kind of refreshing. Honestly, it's disappointing to see something that you love end. But at the same time, it's being happy that it's also being respected, and I think that that's the thing for me. It's radical in a sense to be able to say, you know what, we're ending it here and giving a valid reason as to why. It sucks, but hey, what can you do? So I don't want, a lot of people, I'm pretty sure nobody's seeing that show as a failure. I don't think anybody's seeing Smiling Friends as a failure. I think that the thing here is just making sure it doesn't overstay its welcome. Like I said before, a show like that's so edgy and over the top can become something that could get old if it's going on for too long, depending on how the writers. This is why writing is so important, you know what I mean? Especially for a show like that, it's going to take a lot of intentionality to make things, kind of keep things, not completely fresh all the time, but to make it something that can last longer. It's going to take good writers to keep that going. If you don't have the writers that's able to keep that going and they're getting burnt out and stuff like that, and they don't really have anything else to really say at the time, then it just makes sense to kind of just, let it go for that moment. And like I say, it also gives it a better shot at coming back later to the fans that love it so much. And we could be fair here and say that not all shows end because the creators wanted it to. Sometimes shows ends because of their business reality of it all. We can't ignore that part of it. The modern television industry, especially the streaming era, runs a lot on data. It's very ratings, completion ratings and subscriber retention and international performance and cost to view ratios and all these other things that go into it. That creates this whole thing of a show feeling massive online but still not meet the internal metrics. Virality does not always translate into long-term profitability. We've seen networks and streaming services cancel shows that had loud fan bases and still didn't hit the numbers that the executives actually wanted. I think that right now in the creative industry is going through a major creative shift. There's corporate consolidation, budget tightening, fewer and riskier renewals, shorter season orders, mergers, and layoffs. There's also restructuring. Studios are becoming more cautious. So sometimes when a show ends after maybe 2 or 3 seasons, it's not poetic, it's just financial, and that's the part that sucks. Because I've heard time and time again good shows that have kind of been abruptly ended because of background stuff, even though you have a clear audience that loves the show. And sometimes it's not given the time that it needs to really establish itself for new people to watch. You know what I mean? And it kind of it sucks. Everything's about money sometimes, not really necessarily the art. But I think that what makes the situation with Smiling Friends interesting is that it doesn't fit necessarily into either narrative. Because before the announcement that season 3 would be the last season, there were reports that were saying that it had been renewed beyond that to have more seasons. Outlets like Decider had previously discovered future season expectations, meaning from the outside, it seemed like the show had runway. They're gonna take it and run with it and give us more seasons. But yet here we are, it's ending anyways. Which brings a complicated possibility that even though a show can be renewed, it still can end early if that's what the creators want. At the end of the day, renewals don't guarantee movement or momentum, and I guess that's just a part of the business. And, you know, like networks like Adult Swim and these other platforms can still, you know, renew a show for more seasons or plan for more seasons, but creators can still decide they're done with it. There's also a possibility that negotiations can shift, that priorities can change, and that energy can also run out. And us as fans, as the public, we're not going to see the full picture of what's going on behind the scenes all the time. But, you know, at the same time, two truths can exist at once. You know, some shows end early because numbers weren't strong enough, and some shows end early because creators chose to protect the work. And sometimes it's just a mix of both. Maybe burnout is real, maybe economics are real, maybe both pressures exist simultaneously. The entertainment industry is rarely clean. It's contracts, it's negotiation, it's timing, it's corporate strategy, it's human exhaustion. That's what makes it messy. So I think that to answer the question of why shows don't last as long anymore, I think it's kind of like a mixed bag here. It's not necessarily just greed. It's not necessarily just the art. I think it's like the collision of both. Like it's both. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. What do you guys feel about Smiling Friends ending? I'm personally kind of sad about it. I was not expecting to get that announcement. I was like, after 3 seasons, just 3. And a lot of times with these animation shows, especially the good ones, sometimes you get like these long gaps between each season anyways. So like a lot of times we're waiting for more content to come out from our favorite shows. Those are usually the ones that are really, there's a lot of intention behind them. The ones that take a little bit longer in between to get new seasons. But just in general, like when you hear like a show like this, like ending so early, like it really sucks because you expect it to kind of last longer. So needless to say, me and a lot of other people were disappointed to see the ending of it. But you know what? I still appreciate social media and like the circulation of memes and like different things that kind of keep us in touch with the show. I feel like it'll never fully disappear. And I do have hope that maybe someday we'll get something, another, you know, maybe down the line, they'll probably bring it back and start it back up again when the creators feel like they want to. But I really do feel like as fans and as watchers, as the audience, as the public, we can, you know, do our part to, you know, watch it, you know, keep streaming it, keeps, you know, sharing those TikToks and reels and, you know, things like that, and just continue to keep the series alive. And I feel like it's, like I said, I think it's one of those type of things where that show has definitely made its mark. I think for a lot of different people, like, is it something that like people are inspired by or anything? Probably not. Like, it's just, you know, like I said, like a brain rot type of show. But like, it was weird. It was interesting. It was different. I think that, you know, it definitely created a strong fan base. And so who knows what's in store for the future. But with that being said, see you guys in the next one.